We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And I want to give everybody who was looking forward to my PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X settings the heads up that there will be a separate breakout video this week for that I intend to make, and breakout audio. If Tom chooses to post it, it'll be 726.5, because it's not going to be a full episode. It's not going to take next week's number. But yeah, I've decided to do that instead of taking up all the time in this week's podcast. So if you're not interested in those things, you don't have to spend any time listening to them. Hooray. And if you are interested,
thank goodness.
If you are interested in them, then they'll be in a more easily accessible and dedicated podcast semi-episode for that. Yeah.
So they're in the highlights. Anything that people should... Like, can you tease it?
Sure.
Tease it a little
I
bit?
will say there's one very important setting to make on your television, not in either of the game consoles, if you want the best experience. And just to give very quick impressions, I will say I personally vastly prefer the PlayStation 5 controller. I think it is a big step up compared to previous generations and versus the Xbox controller. So that's my personal favorite as far as the controllers go.
Okay.
As far as the systems and the look, I don't think the PlayStation 5 is really that big. If you were around for first generation DVD players, it's that. It's a little bit different shaped and different colored, but that's what it is. It's not that bad. The Xbox Series X is a squat, dense brick. It is heavier than the PlayStation 5, despite being shorter. And yeah,
probably heat sinks.
I will basically say that as game systems, settings are going to be fine. As Blu-ray players and Ultra HD Blu-ray players, neither of them is great, but the PlayStation 5 is better on that front. As streaming service systems, it's a mess, and that might be what a lot of the video ends up being about. Because as far as getting audio and video to work the way you want it on the streaming services, that was clearly not the priority this generation. And there you go. That's my tease.
Okay. Didn't you want to say something else about the experience?
Well, I did just want to mention that, so everything went very smoothly with receiving my Xbox Series X. I had ordered two of them, one from Best Buy Canada, one from Walmart Canada. The one from Walmart Canada shipped from Ontario and got stuck on a train halfway across the country, so that one didn't arrive until the Monday. You know, it was supposed to be out on the, Tuesday of the week prior, so it was almost a week late. But the Best Buy one arrived on launch day, so that was good. As far as PlayStation 5s go, I had actually ordered two of them, both from Best Buy, but they would only ship one per household, so I used my dad's login information for Best Buy to send one to his place. So the one that went to my parents' place showed up on launch day. The one that I had ordered for myself did not show up, and the order, even though it was out of everything I ordered, it was the first thing I pre-ordered, was the PlayStation 5 for me. Pre-orders went live first for PlayStation 5, and that was the very first thing, was my own that I ordered on my account, and all it said was in progress. Everything else it said shipped. Everything else, my credit cards have been pre-authorized and then charged on launch day. My PlayStation 5 just said in progress. And it continued to do so until today. And so I had actually emailed Best Buy customer service to be like, any chance we can look into this, because it just says in progress, hasn't said shipped. And they got back to me, like, well, your credit card has been pre-authorized but not charged. We have your order. It's on file, but it's been transferred to our shipping department, and they don't seem to be able to tell us where it is. But good news, it arrived on Saturday when everything still said in progress on the website, and my credit card hadn't been charged yet. So as we speak, now everything looks like it's fine. But that was an interesting tale of waiting a few extra days for my PlayStation 5 to arrive.
That happened to me one time on Amazon. I ordered something I said it was going to take like 3 weeks to get there,
Right.
and then it got there like a couple of days later. A couple of days after I ordered, and like a week after that, I got a notice from Amazon, your order has shipped.
Yep.
I'm like, okay. I mean, usually Amazon's really good about that stuff.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that like maybe Best Buy would just like completely lost in their system, and I physically received it, but never got charged for it. Maybe they send me a third one and charge me for that. But it doesn't appear that that's what's going to happen at this point. It seems to be cleared up in their back end. But all is well. I've received all the things I ordered, and there you go.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right. Let's see here. I don't even know where I want to talk about first. So last week, there was a tropical storm that came through Eta that went through and destroyed, I don't know, just what they did. Nicaragua, that area, got hit really hard with like a Cat 4, and then it swirled around the Gulf for a while and kind of got lost. And everybody said, go home, you're drunk. So it went to Tampa, because where else do you go? And it hit a little north of us.
Okay.
And what that means is that we were on the worst possible side of the storm. Now, my house has been hit, this area has been hit many, many times by hurricanes. My house in particular has never flooded.
Okay.
At least no one has ever made an insurance claim. You can look that up here in Florida, whether or not somebody's made an insurance claim about flooding. My house had never flooded. We looked into that before. We bought the house. So Ada was only a tropical storm when it hit here, and it took everybody by surprise. So Thursday night at about 12:30. Now high tide was at about 11:45. And 12:30, the storm's raging outside, and my son comes and gets me and says, Dad, there's water in the garage. And I said, where in the garage? He goes, all of it.
Everywhere.
So I went out there, and sure enough, the garage was floating. We have a step up from the outside to the inside of the house, from the garage floor. And so one step, maybe 6 inches. And it made it about, I think at the highest point, about 2 inches up that step. So it was about 4 inches from coming in the house. Front door was the same situation. Back door was even closer because of the slope and stuff like that. But many, many, many of my neighbors in this neighborhood, and I have found out recently that when this neighborhood was built, the city said, you may not, if we will let you develop this area, we'll let you build up this area. They built up sandbars or built up bars and then put, land and then put houses on top of them. And they said, if you're going to do that, you can't build below 6 feet above sea level. You got to be at least 6 feet above sea level. Right. And the builder said, yeah, sure, we'll do that. And then built 4 feet.
Yeah.
Everywhere was 4 feet. And then, and then the houses were sold and built, and that was it. So massive flooding. You were driving around my neighborhood. There's a lot of people that are suffering. I get a lot of people on Facebook are like, oh, I finally get that new kitchen I wanted. I'm like, yeah, that sounds real good on paper.
There's someone in your neighborhood who can tell you about that experience.
Yeah. So we were walking around this. My wife and I took the dog for a walk tonight, and we were just walking around and looking at all the houses. And it's probably, from what we can see, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the houses in the neighborhood have, soaking wet carpets on their front yards that they've been pulled out, or clearly drywall. That you can hear the fans going inside the house.
Cut off the bottom 6 inches of your drywall. Yep.
No, it's more like 3 or 4 feet usually.
Wow, that high.
They'll cut because it wicks up. It wicks up the drywall. So we were a lot of people are suffering right now in this neighborhood. So and in other places too, of course. But there's that's going on. Ooh. So it's been a little bit of a taxing, trying time of this last week.
On top of how long it's been taxing already, my goodness.
And we're there. Friday, the guy says the cabinet guy's going to button up the last couple of things. He needs to do last couple of things, but the kitchen's basically done. We literally took all the my wife Wednesday afternoon was like, let's just finish the rest of these boxes. I'm like, it's just little things. Who cares about that stuff? We'll do it whenever. She's like, no, let's just finish it up. Right. So we finished it up Wednesday, and the storm rolled in. I think it rolled in. It must have rolled in Thursday. Yeah, something like that. So Thursday morning it started raining, and if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have lost anything, but it definitely would have been inconvenient. We lost almost nothing. We definitely lost nothing of import.
Right. I mean, all things considered, if there is anywhere to flood, your garage is probably the best option.
Well, the people around here, and you could just see it walking around. I could see these people, and they got the garage doors up, which I've never seen inside their garages before because they're clearly hoarders. I mean, they just got like shelves full of crap in there, and I'm like, what are you doing with all this stuff? No one parks in their garage. We park in our garage where we used to. Right now, there's a stove in our garage that we need to get rid of, but. So we've got, I mean, everything is finally buttoned up around here, and I sat there and I told my wife, I threw some towels by the doors just in, I mean, I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but I was like, if it starts to come, because it didn't look like, I could kind of judge where the tide was, and I was like, you know, it would really have to have a big surge in order for it to get in, and I could see it sort of draining. So I'm like, well, if it comes in, maybe it'll only come in a little bit, and I'll be able to sort of just, yeah. But I told my wife, I'm like, if we had gotten water all through this house, and they said that we had to start over again in the kitchen and rebuild all that stuff, I'm like, I just would have lit a match and burnt the place down. I'm like, I'm out.
So is there any repair that has to be done to your garage? Was it drywalled in there, and that needs to be? There
was a little bit of drywall, but it's way up against the back wall, and it was probably about maybe 3 feet of it. You know, linear feet. Everything else is like concrete block. So my sense is I don't care.
Well, if any drywall got wet, you don't want it to mold. So
that's true. Yeah. So we're gonna have to talk to our insurance guy, but there's so many other insurance, claims going on that we kind of feel like ours is so minor. I don't really want to.
Yeah, well, you don't want it to a stupid minor thing to lead to bigger headaches later. So
we will. Yes, we will. We've already talked about it. We're gonna give him a call, but. On top of that, okay, so that's that.
Okay.
I also have a set of headphones in for review right now. We're going to talk about them next week. They're called a Tribit Quiet Plus 50. Tribit, Tribit.
I'm sure it's Tribit.
Anyways. Yeah, they are a active noise canceling Bluetooth headset that can. And the reason I got it in, you know me. I'll review any headphones.
Sure.
But the reason I was most interested in these is because they can connect to 2 separate Bluetooth devices at the same time.
All right.
So this dual Bluetooth connectivity is what drew me to them, because there's a lot of people right now, including my wife and kids, who are on Zoom and stuff like that, but they're also they're also getting messages and stuff from their phones, trying to connect to multiple devices, and this allows you to connect to multiple devices. So I was really interested in that aspect of it. So next week we will be talking about them. If any of you have any experience with them or any other of those headphones, just go ahead and shoot me a message, and we can I'll address any of your questions next week. So other than that, our last announcement is that next week is Thanksgiving in America. So Thanksgiving morning, I thought we decided at 9 a.m. Eastern time, but I don't know if maybe that was just in my brain if I decided that. So there will be the crossover podcast event, the Thankful and Infinite podcast. Mm-hmm. We recorded it last week with the HT guys and DJ, he who shall always worm his way into my podcast somehow, along with Lee, Lee Overstreet, who's our special guest from time to time. Great time. Yeah. We had a good time. Went for a normal length of time for us, but quite long for everybody else.
Just a little bit longer than normal for us. About 2 hours and 15 minutes, I think it came out to. Something along those lines.
So you and I will have to. I haven't put it together yet, but we'll have to do some sort of intro for it. And
do we need to
splice it? I don't know. I have to listen to it. I don't know.
I don't think we need a special intro. Just throw your music on there. That's about it.
We'll see. So look for that Thanksgiving morning, but don't worry. On the next day, Black Friday, we will be having our episode as normal. So we will continue along those lines. My kids will be off that week. So next week, so I don't know when we'll be recording, but I'm going to try to record during. This is behind the scenes, but we're gonna record during the week. I think during the day, I'm going to try to record during the day.
Should be doable.
So look forward to that. So you get 4+ hours of us next week, and it was good. It was a good podcast. A lot of fun. Did a good job of not talking over the top of each other. If anybody was guilty of it, more than anybody else, it was me. You know me.
I don't recall that happening very much at all. So,
well, sometimes somebody says something, I just gotta comment. I gotta comment. There's There was a lot of times when I held my tongue, but there's some things that the mouth starts moving before the brain says, wait. You did it. You shouldn't say that yet. Oh, you shouldn't say that at all is what we meant to say. And then now it comes. So if you have never listened to DJ over at the Brightside Home Theater Podcast or whatever it's called, you get to hear him there. If you've never listened to the HT guys, I would be shocked. But they are also on there, and it was great fun. So thanks. Looking forward to do it again, and maybe more crossover events. Who knows? But thanks a lot, everybody, for that. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com, leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/avrant podcast, youtube.com/avrant. You can go contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is for First Reflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. Also, don't forget on the Infinite Podcast one, there will be an announcement from me.
Oh, that's right.
I got a big secret announcement coming up. Very spooky. DJ was very concerned about this, and I don't want to spoil anything. I'm just going to say, you should all be very concerned.
That's all right. That's how you want to tease it? I'll leave it to you.
I don't really want to tease it. I don't really care. There's a big announcement coming. It's huge. It is. There were some gasps. There were gasps. They gasped. There was gasping. So look forward to that. We want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, all you have to do is support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is go to patreon.com/avrantpodcast and sign up to be a supporting member of our big community, our AVRant community. So right now we have 125 patrons. These are people who every month patreon.com takes a little money from them and gives most of it to us. So we want to thank those 125 patrons, including Alan, for supporting the podcast. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. That is patreon.com/AVRant podcast. If you have not signed up yet and think, hey, I wouldn't mind throwing a few dollars or maybe a few dollars with a bunch of zeros at the end of it, because, hey, there's no limit. Okay. $1 is the minimum. But yeah, you can become a voluntary subscriber if you want to think of it that way. And thanks very much to our 125 patrons. Alan, thank you very much for being one of them.
And if you can't support us financially, we understand. Just tell us how you supported us and in what way, and if it passes muster, we will. I don't think anybody's never
We're not
passed.
picky.
I think somebody. We're not super. I think somebody's like, I told my friend, like, good enough. All right. Andrew reached out to Alan. Is this the same Alan from before or a different Alan?
I'm pretty sure that's the same Alan this time. Yes. That
Okay.
was our patron.
Anyways, doesn't matter. Alan, so one of our listeners, Alan, to offer his experience since he went through a similar renovation and home theater build to what Alan is going through now. So what was the thing with that? What? I don't know what that is.
Alan is, he was going through like wiring, trying to decide how much to wire inside the walls versus outside the walls and all that type of setup. And Andrew's like, hey, I went through that, so happy to help out. And I know that they connected via email, and Alan's like, hey, really nice to have this community of people wanting to reach out and help out, and so we appreciate that. Andrew, thank you for doing that.
I've done the same thing with my neighbors on kitchens. I'm like, listen, I can tell you what to look for. I can tell you your pitfalls. They're like, no, we got it. I'm like, you're good. All right, whatever. Fine, you're gonna be fine. We're gonna put vinyl planks down. Like, okay, right. That's a great idea. You should totally do that in an area that floods. Definitely put vinyl, but they're waterproof. Really? They're waterproof. So, the water gets underneath them, and then what happens? Okay. But, yeah. This is different, Alan.
It is.
And Alan plugged AVRant when he acquired about the LS50 Meta speakers from KEF. They sell a center version, but it's literally just a single instead of a pair. If you lay it on its side, the feet are still on the bottom, and the logo doesn't turn. So it really just looks like an LS50 that fell over. So he isn't sure if he wants that look. I don't know why you wouldn't want that. I can't even read the logos from where I sit. Who cares what they look like?
And the little feet, I'm not sure if the little feet are adhesive and aren't actually on there when it comes out of the box, or if they're screw in and could be potentially unscrewed, or if they're just affixed. I don't actually know. Or, since it's really not that big a speaker, you could just stand it vertically, because it'll still fit where most other centers will fit. It just doesn't look wide like a traditional center speaker looks, but it will perform very, very well because the LS50s are, of course, a concentric design where there's one woofer with the tweeter right in the middle of it. So it doesn't matter what way you orient it. You could lay it diagonally if you want to. It'll still sound the same. But thank you for talking us up to Kef. I'm sure they really, really care about AVRant Podcast, but it never hurts.
Should. We talk about them all the time.
The more people who mention us, who knows? Good things can happen.
Who knows?
Thank you, Al.
Did you hear about Atlantic Technology's new center channel?
No.
It's 5.5, I think, feet wide.
Okay.
It's got an MTM design in the center, and the MTM is vertically oriented, and then it's got two woofers on either side of that.
Atlantic does that, yeah.
It's crazy. All right, $2,300, dude. It's nuts. All right, so we got some notes of gratitude from Jason, who's a member of our 2 Hour Plus Club and also has 700 plus episodes. He's also the 700 plus episode club, so he's been around for a while. He remembers the 35-minute episodes with Dina on Uvu, which was a service we used to use because it was free and it put us side by side, and I could just record it somehow.
Lip sync was almost as good as our YouTube videos.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. So anyways, he has enjoyed our weekly episodes for a very long time. And Carrie, who checked out She-Ra on Netflix thanks to us recommending it, and Rob talking about it for an hour and a half on the Bright Side Home Theater podcast.
I did.
He wound up watching the whole series, and it really surprised him with its complexity, characters, and interpersonal relationship. His wife couldn't help but wonder why he was watching it. She just said, sit down and watch She-Ra with me, darling.
I know.
But it was the perfect antidote for the vitriol of election season, so thanks. And plus, we got Brian and Alan also. So we got Jason, Carrie, Brian, and Alan all sending notes of gratitude, so thank you very much, Sean.
Indeed, I shall repeat the names Jason, Carrie, Brian, and Alan. Really do appreciate the notes of encouragement and gratitude being sent in for keeping the podcast going. You're hearing what Tom is going through, and I mean, hey, I've suffered too. I had to wait like 2 extra days for a PlayStation 5. No one has any man suffered as I have. That is the question to be asked with something
That's
like
right.
that.
And it's like 19 degrees up there or something. He's just sweltering.
Actually, I'm very pleased. It's been about stayed between about 3 and 8 degrees Celsius, which I find extremely comfortable. So
you're a very strange man. I do. It has cooled down here, and my window is open. And I'm going to end up suffering for it because these lights are going to roast me in here. I turned the fan off, so we'll see. All right, in the news, Emotiva has entered the headphone game with their $300 AirMotive GR1 headphones. They use 50mm drivers made of polycarbonate substrate with graphene fused onto both sides. Ear pads or memory foam wrapped in vegan leather.
AKA
really?
fake leather.
Vegan leather.
That's the term to
now,
make it sound
if that's not leather from an actual vegan, I want my money back. You can tell if it's vegan leather if you put it on and you say, meat is murder. Wait, what? Meat is murder. Okay, so that's how you know. Anyways, sorry. I have some very good friends who are vegans, and I love them just as much as my non-vegan friends.
I see.
Though I would love them a little bit more if they ate bacon. The ear cups are semi-open, partially blocking sound but allowing some air movement through. The cord plugs into both sides with 2.5mm connectors. So $300 AirMotive GR1 headphones.
That's right.
Vegan leather. Shut up. That's my response to that. I'm sorry.
I always, companies...
That is clever marketing, though. I will say
Sure.
that is clever marketing.
Company like Emotiva, which of course best known for their amplifiers, fairly well known for their processors, and waiting a very, very long time for the promised features to arrive via updates. But anytime a company just gets into the headphone game, I'm like, I give it a sideways glance.
Velodyne did it. I mean, look at Velodyne. Velodyne...
if you are a headphone company like Sennheiser and they announce new headphones, yes, of course, that makes sense. But Emotiva getting in there, I give it a little bit of a sideways glance. But hey, hopefully they sound good. They look kind of cool. The price isn't utterly ridiculous. I'm sure it has a good profit margin.
Yeah, I'm sure it does, too. So we missed reporting on this last month when it happened on October 20th, but a massive fire has almost completely destroyed the AKM factory in Nobika City, Nobeoka City in Japan, where almost all of AKM's DACs and ADCs, or analog to digital converters, are manufactured. Thankfully, all 400 employees were evacuated safely, and there were no serious injuries, but it took over 80 hours to extinguish the fire, and the manufacturing plant was destroyed. This will impact a large number of audio companies, including Sound United, Anthem, JDS Labs, and Mini DSP. Outsourcing has begun, but AKM, and this one factory in particular, were the only source for many specific chips. So once companies exhaust their supply of components already on hand, it's expected to be a rough go for the next 12 months. So
yeah, so as if 2020 couldn't get any worse, which is exactly the way that Audioholics couched their coverage of this.
I don't know that this is the tragedy of 2020 that we all need to really go, well, there's the cherry on top of 2020. This isn't even a nut on that fell off the side. I don't know, man.
This is not good. I mean, the AKM chips, so I mean, this is digital analog converters, analog to digital converters, but also a whole plethora of different processing chips used in multitudes of electronic devices, including a lot of audio devices. It's not the simplest thing to just swap from one to another. You think, just get somebody else's DAC. How hard could it be? Nah, it's like you got to draw PCBs, remanufacture every component that attaches to them. There's reprogramming to be done. So, I mean, when things are on a 2 and 3 year product cycle, like, say, Sound United's AV receivers, it's not a trivial thing when your supplier of key components cannot supply them to you anymore. So I don't know what is going to happen for, like the 2020 models should continue to be fine. Those have already been procured and in manufacture. The 2021 models are probably okay. So where we might really see this is in 2022 models. There might have to be a delay before those arrive is honestly what I'm anticipating as far as audio equipment goes.
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see how it shakes out. They've got some time. They certainly have got some time to figure this out. I know that lead times on these things. We can't understand it from the front end where we are. We're looking at the end of the line and saying, well, just make a different chip. It's a big deal. Or send your plants from this factory to a different factory, or AKM or whatever their name is. Go and quickly buy another factory and start. It's probably not as easy as all that.
No, it is not that easy.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that shakes out. That's for sure. So Warner reached an agreement with Amazon to bring the HBO Max streaming service to Fire TV devices. That means Roku is the only major streaming player without HBO Max right now, but Fire TV still lacks Peacock. So
yes. So Roku and Peacock reached an agreement. So when Peacock
that's good, I guess.
Yeah, when Peacock and HBO Max first launched, neither of them was on Fire TV devices or Roku devices. But then, Roku reached an agreement with Peacock, and now Fire TV, Amazon, has reached an agreement with HBO Max. So, if you want both of them, I guess you get one of each. Or you could just get an Apple TV or an NVIDIA Shield, because, they already do them both.
I was going to say, yeah. All right, some comments here. Dazz asked us for a rugged portable Bluetooth speaker with good sound quality used for barbecuing outside in his garage. We recommended the Ultimate Ears Megaboom 3. He saw it on sale at Amazon, but they were out of stock. So when he spotted the UE Wonderboom 2-pack at Costco for only $100, he decided to give them a try. Then the Megaboom, this is too many booms. The Megaboom 3 came back in stock while he was still within his return window, so he was able to compare them head to head. The Wonderboom 2-pack can wirelessly connect to each other to both play the same thing, but they are not in stereo, so it's two mono. The biggest issue is that they would occasionally lose their connection, so sound would end up only coming out of one of them, kind of a groove ruiner. The Megaboom 3 is bigger, so it's able to play a bit lower, a bit louder, and the battery life is longer. It can also be controlled and adjusted via an app, whereas the Wonderboom 2-pack cannot. They're actually voiced very similarly. All three could play together without a noticeable difference in timbre, but kick drums and bass drum guitars hit harder with the Megaboom, so combined with its other conveniences, it easily won the head-to-head, and the Wonderboom 2-pack is going back to Costco. He can see why we recommended the Ultimate Ears. They sound good, and they're easy to use, so he says, thanks again for the recommendation. So these were all Ultimate Ears products. One is Wonderboom 2-pack, and the other one is Megaboom 3.
That's right.
I guess. So there you go. Whatever. Yay.
A bit of a review.
That was very hard to read.
Okay.
Just if I had ever read it before, it might have been a little easier.
Got through it. Sounded reasonable to me. Of course, I wrote it, so
all right.
Who would know?
Who would know? Infinite Gary. Regarding the new Anthem 15-channel receiver and pre-pro models, word from Anthem is that they have to implement Dolby Volume according to Dolby's current spec. Dolby Volume is considered post-processing, and they will be offering 3 profiles: music, movie, and night mode. The EQ that is applied and the amount of dynamic range compression is different in each of those, but Anthem can't separate the EQ from the dynamic range compression this time. However, ARC Genesis has a professional mode where you can adjust the levels manually to create your own custom movie, music, and night modes. You can also save multiple ARC Genesis configurations and load them quickly via the app. Furthermore, we were not aware of this, but Anthem informed Gary that on the older models, if you engage Dolby Volume, it would actually deactivate the Atmos channels. Their implementation of Dolby Volume on older models only went up to 7.1. And I bet they weren't bragging about that.
I did not know this because I had not owned them. I was going by the manual that had nary a peep of that limitation going on there. So I'm very glad Gary let me know that he looked into it and let me know, because that's some good information to have.
Yeah. So lastly, they're looking into allowing DTS Neural X Pro Upmixer to be applied to Dolby signals and for Dolby Surround Upmixers to be applied to DTS signals, but they aren't making any promises on that front. And out of the box, there's no cross-pollination, and Dolby Surround Upmixer will not use front wides. So that's all information about Anthem for the 3 of you that are thinking of buying that thing.
I mean, I was considering it just because the price in Canada is such a price break, but the lack of curves of equal loudness without dynamic range compression of some sort also being applied, and the lack of being able to use an upmixer on any sort of Dolby signals that will put sound into the front wide speakers. Now that might change, that might come, and if it does, I'm like, yeah, I could just make a few different, there's probably 3 or 4 volume levels that I typically use. So I could manually create my own Arc Genesis profiles for each of them, create my own curves of equal loudness that way, and that might be enough to sway me to do that just for the price savings. But for now, Monoprice's Monolith HTP1 processor remains my top choice for a 15-speaker system.
Rob's the kind of person that gets a message. You could save $4,000 if you act now. And Rob's like, I can save $4,000. And I look at it and say, there is nothing I can save $4,000 on that I could possibly afford. That would not cause an immediate and unconditional divorce. So there we go. Rich wanted to provide a warning. He bought a Sony X900H. After the most recent firmware update, his Verizon Fios cable box was no longer recognized, and there's no picture. He is not alone. Apparently this is going on. Many people are reporting that many different cable boxes and soundbars no longer work after the recent firmware update, and Sony has acknowledged the issue and says they're working on the fix. So, just sit tight. So if you have an X900H and you haven't installed the latest firmware, do not walk away from the remote side.
I mean, someone asked us last week or the week before, our approach to firmware updates. And
I know. I'd be bricked right now.
Right?
You watch me.
Yeah, this is the thing where I'm like, let's find out before applying it, and don't check the box that says just automatically update as soon as it's available. Very disturbing that this is the case. They're racing to try and fix some of the interoperability issues with Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. That's going on as well. So plenty of firmware updates will be arriving. I have no doubt.
They're fixing things so fast, they're breaking other stuff.
Yep.
That's the way I fix stuff around my house, too. I'm real good at that. I like to fix things so much. I fix things so well that I need to buy a new one afterwards. That's how good I fix it. Jay, this is a question, our first question for this week. Jay, Film Riot posted a YouTube video showcasing how the new crop of ultra short throw projectors has opened up a new version of an old film technique for low budget productions. It used to be common to use rear projection to create moving backgrounds behind actors on the stage. You'd see it all the time in driving scenes, for example, but it was almost entirely replaced by green screen. More recently, some productions like Oblivion have used massive wraparound screens to create the backgrounds. This allows lighting and reflections to look more realistic than green screen. And now that it has been taken to the next level with The Mandalorian, which uses huge LED screens and real-time graphics rendering to create virtual backgrounds and sets. The price for those is too high for low budget productions, however, and that's where ultra short throw projectors come in. They don't require the large amount of space behind the screen like an old rear projection technique, and today's models are much, much brighter, allowing them to produce more convincing lighting and reflections. What are our thoughts? If they didn't do this on Saturday Night Live at the beginning of the season, where they had that one, like the background kept changing behind whoever the singer was,
Okay.
I was like, the whole thing changed. Like the floor, everything changed. They must have done something similar to this on Saturday Night Live, because they don't have the space.
No,
that I'm aware of.
It's a small studio
on there
really,
to do. Yeah, to do that. So they must have done something similar, and it was extremely effective. So I think, innovative ways of using technologies often don't ever occur to the people who invented the technology. This does not surprise me that somebody looked at it and said, "Huh, for $3,000, I can basically do this, with and film on it." I think it's fantastic. I think this is great. I think that's what everybody needs to be thinking about, and especially if you're a student or freshly out of college, you're trying to make a name for yourself, you're trying to do something in your garage or whatever. I mean, I know that's like the trope is to do something in your garage, but people are doing that, man, and they're out there and they're making it, and they that sort of guerrilla filmmaking, and however you can make it work. I think it's fantastic. I think it's great.
Yeah, I'm all on board for this. They showed some good examples in that where would they say Film Riot? Yeah, some good examples of how if you're aware of the limitations, for example, if you're going to fill up a fairly sizable background, that means you have to project a large image, and of course with the ultra short throw projectors that we can buy, they have a limited focal range. Most of them top out at a 120 inch diagonal image. Some of them go up to 130 or 135. But they were pointing out how a lot of times in a film, the background is out of focus anyway.
Sure.
So if you've already planned the cinematography for that, you can go ahead and blow up the image to be way, way bigger. It'll be out of focus in real life, but then when you record that way, if you've actually planned the cinematography correctly, it can give you a very effective depth of field appearance from the background being out of focus, even though the camera is actually in focus. So that's the trick, right? You have to be aware of that thing, but once you take things like that into account, The Mandalorian is proving it, what they can do with having those reflections actually present versus trying to put all of that in there via CGI. If everything were green screen, it really does look more convincing. I think this is great. Film Riot posted one where they were saying it's most effective, like this technique of using inexpensive ultra short throw projectors just on a screen behind the actors, that they found it most effective in dimly lit scenes. If you try to make it too bright, it doesn't really fully work there. But if you're shooting like what's supposed to be somebody out on a apartment rooftop or something like that at night, and you put in this big cityscape in behind them, a little bit out of focus and dark, like it looks fantastic. It's amazing. And the cost for doing that is so much lower. So yeah, I love it. I love taking something that exists now, didn't exist at this price before, and putting it to a creative use like this. Fantastic. Yeah.
And it really helps the actors too. As an actor, when you're trying to get a hold of your character and get a hold of the scene and emotionally invest in it, I mean, I think a lot of this, the era of the big time era, and I think of like Attack of the Clones and the three prequel movies, which is like just green screen, everything. Like they didn't even bother having any sort of set. Like this box is this box is this, and this dot up here is a monster face or whatever. Giving the actors anything to hold on to will get you so much more of a convincing performance, even if it's just as little as being able to have them be able to, before the scene starts, look at the background behind them and know where they are and have a better idea of where they are. I think it's you'll see that you'll get much more convincing performances out of actors that maybe you didn't necessarily expect them. Also
with computer graphics cards, the amount of power in them now coming down to, for just a general user, it's still a bit expensive, but compared to full-on professional rendering
Right.
stuff that like Pixar was using a few years ago. It's amazingly cheap. So the idea of combining the real-time graphics rendering that The Mandalorian is doing, but throwing that on an ultra short throw projector instead of a massive LED screen like what they're using, like, now you can start to do some crazy things with perspective and moving shots that can take you to movement and planets and stuff that you couldn't do that as an amateur low budget production before, and now that possibility is opening up. So yeah, excellent stuff.
It's no doubt. All right, Mitch has heard us discussing dialogue normalization, aka Dolby DialNorm. We have discussed this?
It has come up before.
All right. It was a little while ago, he says, and he would like to know a little bit more about it. Me too. He has a Marantz SR7011, and he couldn't find a setting labeled DialNorm or dialogue normalization. The only mention of it was under settings, audio, surround parameters, loudness management, on or off. When loudness management is on, it says it enables dialogue normalization and dynamic compression. It says it is only for Dolby signals, and there's a separate dynamic compression setting that can be set to low, off, low, medium, high, or auto. So he tried turning loudness management on and dynamic compression off. He never wants there to be dynamic range compression. He tried some broadcast TV channels with Dolby Digital 5.1 audio, but he never saw anything on his front panel display. He thought the dial norm negative number would show up, but he never saw anything like that. So what should his settings be for this, and how can he tell if dial norm is active? So dialogue normalization, that's a volume, basically, right? That is dynamic range compression. It's trying to keep the volume the same level. Is that not what's going on here, Rob?
No, it doesn't have to be dynamic range compression. It can come along with it if you optionally turn that on, but you have the option of turning the dynamic range compression off. Dialogue normalization is normalization. It was the original attempt before there was a law about commercials, ads on TV not allowed to be dramatically louder than average content levels. This was Dolby's attempt to do that before that law existed, and now it's basically the technology that they encourage broadcasters to use now that the law is in place, that commercials can't be super loud. So the whole idea is to take the average dialogue volume level and normalize that across all content. So you might find that a particular movie or TV show might actually have a boost in the dialogue normalization to make dialogue that was recorded at a lower level audibly about the same as a commercial that might have a lot of a negative number applied to the dialogue normalization. So it's all about trying to make the average dialogue level uniform across the content. Now, this can be applied on DVDs and Blu-rays and Ultra HD Blu-rays as well, but it is a Dolby technology. So you won't find this on DTS signals or LPCM signals. So it should be on. There's not really much downside to having the dialogue normalization turned on, and the way that you would activate it is exactly that loudness management setting when it comes to Denon Marantz. So under the settings, under the audio tab, you go to the surround parameters and turn loudness management on, and then if you don't want dynamic range compression of making loud things quiet and quiet things loud, you can turn that off separately. Within the loudness management. So those are the correct settings. Now, in order to tell that it is active, first of all, he's got a 7011, which has two front displays. So it has the little porthole display that's visible all the time, and then the full display that's below the flap. So normally I do see DialNorm flash up. It doesn't stay up on the display very long, but it only shows up on the full display that is normally hidden by the front flap. It never shows up on the little porthole. So if you had like a Marantz 6000 series receiver, you'd never see DialNorm show up. It doesn't show up on the little porthole display. But if you ever want to check it while something is playing, because it's not going to pop up and stay there, all you do is go into the settings, go down to the General tab, and under there's an information section. So if you go within the audio part of the information, so there's an audio part and a video part, you go in the audio part, it'll show you the offset. And that is what is labeled. It is not labeled dial norm. It's not labeled dialogue normalization. It's labeled offset. And that shows you the value. And that value won't be there if it's a DTS signal.
Okay. Sorry. What's the difference between dynamic compression settings under loudness management versus Dolby Volume?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's something.
Okay, so Dolby Volume is, as was mentioned with the Anthem thing, it is post-processing. It is 100% optional, and it is Dolby's own attempt to apply essentially curves of equal loudness, but they have combined it with 3 optional levels of dynamic range compression on, like, in addition to the curves of equal loudness. So the whole idea is that whatever you're playing, and it doesn't have to be a Dolby signal, it could be an LPCM signal or a DTS signal, you can optionally activate Dolby Volume, if your AV receiver and or pre-pro has that built in, as a way of activating something that is very similar to Odyssey dynamic volume plus dynamic EQ. So in the Odyssey scheme, you've got dynamic volume and dynamic EQ. You can turn both of them on, or just dynamic EQ without dynamic volume. Dolby Volume doesn't separate the two things. They come together and just give you 3 levels of dynamic range compression, and that gets applied to anything. So the dynamic range compression setting that is under loudness management, that only applies to Dolby signals, only, basically your cable box. That's what that is there for. It wouldn't be applying to anybody else's signals. Dolby Volume would, and Dolby Volume would also be applying curves of equal loudness, whereas dynamic range compression does not.
All right.
Clear as mud.
The clearest mud again. There's the Loudness Management, Dynamic Compression, Dolby Volume, Odyssey Dynamic Volume, and Night Mode. Why so many different ways to apply dynamic range compression? Do they all overlap if you turn them on? He doesn't want any dynamic range compression, so he turns them all off. Is he safe, or will Loudness Management and DialNorm still do something funky on that front? So Dolby Volume, Odyssey Dynamic Volume, Night Mode. I don't know about night. I know night mode should be the same thing, but they are all trying to do the same thing in their own separate ways. I mean, they just analyze the signals
variations,
that comes in. Yeah. I mean, it's not gonna. I'd be funny to have them all on at the same time and see what happens. It might just, sound like no change in volume as it goes across. But I would imagine that there's some sort of order of preference within the receiver, but. They're all just doing the same thing. And yes, I would turn them all off as well.
So to answer on that front, if you have turned all of those off, you've turned dynamic compression under the loudness management off, you've turned Dolby Volume off, you've turned Odyssey dynamic volume off, and you have not used the night mode, then yes, you are safe having loudness management still turned on so that the dialogue normalization part of any Dolby signal is still present. That is fine. That is not going to do. In fact, that is how it is meant to be. That is the way that Dolby would prefer that you do things. So you are safe on that front. They are all just slightly different ways of doing it. And basically what's happened is over the years, more of them have been added. And of course, if somebody was used to the old way that they did dynamic range compression, they don't want the old way to disappear. People complain, customers complain. So they just keep everything that has ever existed still present, and then maybe add a new one on top of it. So typically the way this is applied is the loudness management is its own thing. That's Dolby's own thing. And that is, somewhat optional for Dolby signals, but they have their own idea of how that should be applied. So loudness management on, that's fine. Odyssey will act on top of that. So if you activate dynamic volume as part of Odyssey, it will apply its own dynamic range compression, and it will do so to all types of signals. Dolby Volume, typically whenever it's there, part of that Dolby license for Dolby Volume is that it must be a superset of everything else. It takes over. It says, okay, you already have Odyssey dynamic volume, not anymore. Dolby Volume is here, and now it takes over, and that's typically the way it has to be programmed. Night mode is like the worst of them all. That's the one that just crushes everything. It doesn't do anything intelligently. Odyssey dynamic volume also uses dynamic EQ so that it tries to keep all the sounds audible. Night mode just goes, okay, everything is coming out at this volume level now. We don't care whether it's still audible. We don't care whether it's balanced whatsoever. That's just the way it is now. So all your bass is gone. And it just crushes everything down. So I probably would never use night mode.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat there. So how do you know? Okay, this is on completely different topic. So how do you know what thickness of acoustic panels to put where? It's a general question, so here's the specifics there. He has a 2-channel listening setup in his office. It's a small room, and it's a bit oddly shaped. The left speaker is about a foot from the front wall, but the right speaker is only 4 inches from the front wall. And his love seat is close to the back wall, but half of it juts out into the entryway, so he has basically no space between the back wall and the seat on the right half of the love seat, but about 4 feet of space behind the left half. Yeah. He was thinking of acoustically treating all 4 walls and maybe some panels up high on the front wall too. But does he go for 2-inch panels, 4-inch panels, a mix? And if a mix is better, if it's a mix, is it better to have thicker panels at the front and thinner panels at the back, or vice versa? So it's all about how much, what frequencies you're looking to absorb. Yes. That's what it comes down to. So the thicker the panel, the more of the frequency range it can absorb.
The deeper in frequency it'll go, the lower in frequency it'll absorb.
So a very thin panel will absorb the very highest end and do very little to the mid-range and nothing to the bass. So a lot of times what we'll say is, if you have like a 4-inch thick panel, you're looking to get down into that, try to get past the mid-range and a little bit to the upper end of the bass range. Just putting that panel on your wall probably won't get you there. If you take it on your wall and you give it an air gap, so it's 4 inches of panel, and then an air gap behind it, say it's 2 or 3, 4 inches behind it, then you're better. If you straddle a corner, so there's like at that apex, there might be 6 to 10 inches of air behind it, then you're getting deeper down there. So what do we say in your situation? Like it literally does not matter what situation we're talking about here. So you've got a very specific room. You're like, what should I do in my room? We could tell you that. You can mathematically plot out except that it sounds like this is open. I mean, there's a
not as far as I know. It's just there's there's a door and you walk in, so there's that little bit of a entry, and then he's got his seat sort of like halfway.
But you're walking around half a couch to get. I don't know. I don't quite get it. Anyways, so it is what it is. So there's a lot of times it's your space determines what you can put where.
Sure.
So if we had our druthers, I would put up front. I'm not so on the front wall. I'm worried more about the treble and stuff, echoing back off the back of the speakers or off the rear speakers in him.
Back wave coming back of the speaker that can muddy up your imaging just a little bit.
On the back wall, I would actually rather have thicker panels if I had the option, so that I know that I'm not getting that slap echo right behind my head, where I'm then get my dialogue is getting messed up.
The full vocal range will be absorbed behind you with the thicker panel back there.
And then the thicker panels, I'm also looking for the corner panels. But the reality is, I just put as many panels as thick as I can, as wherever I can put them, because you're never going to put too many panels, because you're not. Well, I mean, I don't know. You might be a crazy person, but even my home office when I lived in Jacksonville, it was normal 10 by 11 room. I had panels on the ceiling. I had panels on the corners. I had panels. And I like something like 13 or 15 4-inch thick 4-foot by 2-foot panels in there. I mean, it was ridiculous. I have had so many panels, and it was very, very, very dead room. You go in there, and it was as dead as any room you've ever been in, and it was still nothing like an anechoic chamber. It was nothing like that. So, but it was very, very dead. It was too dead, really. But that was insane. That was panels as close as I could get them, hanging across the ceiling, on all the corners. I'm talking like the corners of the walls, where the walls met the ceiling, up and they were everywhere. They were just everywhere. So, in your case, like I said, if we had our druthers, thicker panels behind you, a thick panel right to the sides of your speakers to catch that first reflection point, something behind the speaker. I don't really care how thick it is, just to catch,
directly on the front wall.
That sort of thing, and then thicker panels in the corners if I could. I don't have enough information here to really give you adequate or accurate, put a 2-inch panel with 2 foot by 2 foot here and something else there.
I mean, the thing is, unless you're going ridiculous, you kind of can't go too thick from a performance point of view. Like, it's not like you're going to put up a panel of any reasonable size in an office and go, oh, that's just too thick, it's going to cause problems. Like, nah, you can't really go too thick.
I mean, if you see the cones that are in the anechoic chamber,
right,
they're like 4 feet or 6 feet long, to come out to a point, as they come into the room. I mean, they're ridiculously large. Like, you're never going to do that. They just don't. I think the thickest panel I've ever seen was 6 inches thick. I think that's the thickest panel
yeah.
I'm sure that's just 2 4-inch pieces of fiberglass shoved together.
But there's one other aspect, which is that like very often we'll see somebody who's got a room where it's, say, like open on their left side, but there's a wall on their right side. And in your case, you've got like this half a wall behind you, right? You've got a wall directly behind you on half of your seat on the right side, but then kind of an opening on your left. When that's the case, whatever is opposite the opening, you want to go basically as thick as you can, because the whole idea is that, say you've got that scenario, left side is open, but there's a wall on the right side. You basically have a much weaker reflection on your left side and a much stronger reflection on your right side. And that's at all frequencies. So if at all possible, you want to absorb as much as you can on that right wall that exists, so that acoustically speaking, it sounds more similar to the very weak reflections that are coming from the open side on the left. So with this weird half wall behind you, the thicker you can make the panel on that half wall that's on the right hand half of your love seat, the better you will be, the more even it will be to the weaker reflections that's on the open part behind the left half of the love seat.
Right. All right. Jonathan. So it's been quite a while since Jonathan wrote us, but that's because he's been enjoying his home theater so much he hasn't felt the need to upgrade in a while. But he read Jerry Del Coliano?
I think so.
There you go. Colianos, he's the founder and former owner of HomeTheaterReview.com, a guest post on Audioholics, the future of audiophile systems. And he wanted to weigh in as well as hear our takes. I did not read this, so I have no idea what he's going to say. Jerry mentions early in his post of how advancements in technology have made great sounding audio equipment less expensive and physically smaller. I think that's true. He gives the examples of a $500 receiver, $2,000 pair of speakers, subwoofers that don't have to be 2-foot cubes anymore. Okay. Quality Class D amps and subscription services to lossless streaming audio. But he posits that audiophiles as a group are still an aging population and almost entirely male. Misogynist much? Anyways, so he lays out his suggestions for what he thinks might attract younger people and women to become audiophiles. If he says pink, I swear to God, I'm going to stop
Not
reading.
quite, but
Okay.
there's a bit of,
Please, dude, please.
Here we go.
I'm just going to say, I don't know how much more white males can take in this day and age. Like, don't throw us under the bus.
Oh,
here,
man,
guy.
yeah.
Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy. So he says included TV. Jonathan thinks it's ridiculous that the assumption is that an audiophile system must be one pair of speakers and nothing else, included TV. I can get behind this. Okay, this one is fine. Visually hide all the gear in a dedicated rack in a closet. Is this really what's holding younger people back? And is it only an audiophile system if there are huge amps in the middle of the room and cables snaking around everywhere? Visually hide the gear in the dedicated rack. I don't know that this is...
Well, this is one of...
I think this is aimed at women.
Yes,
more than
the
young
assumption that part of what is keeping women out of the audiophile community is that they don't want to see any of the equipment. That's the assumption being made. So that's his recommendation. How to attract women.
Incorporate home automation. Okay, so I'm not sure. I guess so. The comments afterwards is Jonathan's comments.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jonathan says, with whom is Jerry arguing about this? Are audiophiles against home automation for some reason?
Well,
I don't think they ever think about it.
As a stereotype, audiophiles are against any device that does more than one thing. So that's a little bit of where that's coming in, I think.
So invisible speakers, i.e. in-wall and in-ceiling, this again from Jonathan, is this what's holding younger people back, being able to see their audio equipment, or is this all about Jerry's assumption that women won't accept visible audio gear?
I think that was mostly where that was
Yeah, that does seem to be the case. Furniture is Jerry, and again, is Jerry saying that listening has to be a group activity in order to survive, or conversely, that audiophile systems can only serve one listener. And last, room acoustics matter. And Jonathan says, "Isn't that obvious?" Or has Jonathan listened to AVRant for too long? If Jonathan were to summarize, it seems as though Jerry's take is that the current audiophile has a system that is expensive, an eyesore, single purpose for a single listener, and only appealing to aging men. Therefore, if audiophilia is to survive, it has to become affordable, unobtrusive, easy to use, and a group activity. What do we say?
So,
well, yeah, there's a lot of stereotypes that were just
yes.
Reinforced here, and I think that if you've been around this game for a long time, those stereotypes are often reaffirmed.
Well, I mean, yeah, they're founded because, for example, you go to any of the 2-channel dedicated conventions and shows that we used to have before the year 2020 came along. But, you go to Rocky Mountain Audio Fest, something like that, and the systems that you see very often are these massive speakers where it seems like kind of the point is to make them as ugly and obtrusive as possible. That almost seems to be like a feature of them. And then they do have, the amplifiers have to be tube amplifiers, and for some reason they're sitting in the middle of the floor in between the two speakers, leaving no place to put other equipment or a television stand or a center speaker, because it must be 2-channel only. And it is all about, aiming. It's the golden triangle only, and it's aiming at one person and one person only. And yeah, I think a lot of that stereotype has a foundation in reality. I can't really argue that, because if you go to those shows, that is what is presented to you as the audiophile dream system. And I don't think it can really be argued too much that, the people who are attending those types of conventions and shows tend to be predominantly men and getting older. We're not seeing a young crowd of 20s and early 30s. There's some guys there who are that type of age, but the crowd in general it sort of got into it at whatever age and has stayed with it, and we don't see a new crowd coming in. So I think there's some foundation for this stuff. I don't agree that women who are interested in audio, that what's holding them back is all visuals, because that seems to be the implication of what was mostly written there. But I think what does make sense is, this stuff just keeps getting more expensive, the stuff that's targeted only at the 2-channel crowd. They seem to be proud of, hey, look at this turntable. We got it up to a $800,000 price point. Isn't that great? No, not if you want to attract younger people who are trying to save up to buy a house. And yeah, they'd like to have a killer stereo system in there, but they're not going to spend hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on it. So I think making it more affordable, definitely. But I think it's just the definition of audiophilia. I mean, if we take it, the actual definition of a person who loves audio, that to me still exists, very much so. People definitely listen to music in their homes all the time. More than I do, really, because I tend to be mostly watching TV and watching movies and not a ton of time listening to music. I think audiophilia is alive and well. I think the picture of a quote-unquote audiophile who attends conventions and shows, it might be what is changing. So I think it's a perception thing on the part of Jerry more than it is reality. Okay,
so I was more thinking while you were talking than listening to you while you were talking, so I apologize for that. So what I'm going to say is this. There's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that goes on with those sorts of conventions and these sorts of people. The people who listen to this podcast and are interested in this podcast, interested in home theater and trying to upgrade their gear and building their home theaters. In order to get to a place where you can start buying bigger speakers, more subwoofers, building your home theater, there just has to be a certain amount of money that you have made in your life. That is not something that you get out of college and you're like, I'm going to build a home theater in my dorm room. You don't have a house, you don't have any of these other things. So to get to the point where you can start spending those sorts of money and going to conventions and getting into it the way that he's talking about, well then yes, there does tend to be a sort of amount of time that has passed, amount of money that has to be earned. But I don't think that we're going to see fewer audiophiles in the future, or that audiophiles in general it needs to be changed in any way, shape, or form. I don't know about you, Rob, but I could go to a audio convention where I go and I listen to a 2-channel set, and believe me, most of these 2-channel setups, the reason why they're set up this way is because they don't know what's going to bring you in the room, so they get the big speakers and they partner with some big amp people who partner, and they also partner with an equipment rack person company, and then they get a turntable, that real expensive $20,000 turntable, and everybody wants to see everything, and then the cables, of course, and the risers and everything else. Everybody wants to see everything. But when I look at that, I don't look at that and think I want to recreate this at home. Though some people do.
Sure.
I think that's a fraction of a percentage point of the people that are actually into this. Most people look at that and say, "Wow, I really like that amp. I'm going to take it home and put it in my rack next to all my other stuff, or put it in my home theater next to my other stuff, and still have a TV and everything else in there." I think that what you see, I don't go to a Best Buy and think, why don't people have a bunch of TVs on their wall like this? People aren't looking to recreate this experience at home. They just want. But I actually think that we're going to have more audiophiles in the future. I think that the audiophile population is going to get larger and more diverse, and I think the reason is like Rob said. I think you said headphones.
Sure.
A young person can afford headphones, and not only that, they're watching Twitch, they're watching YouTube Let's Plays, they're watching the Games Done Quick marathons where they get people in there to play games really fast in order to raise money for cancer or whatever it is they're raising money for that year. And those people are wearing expensive headphones, and they're going to get used to good sound, and they're going to go back to their earbuds and say, "Ooh, this doesn't sound so well." And then maybe they're going to say, "I don't want to listen to my headphones anymore." And then they're like, "Wait, but everything else sounds garbage. How do I?" I think we're going to see a much larger percentage of people caring about audio going forward, because they're going to have been exposed to affordable good audio through headphones, and then they're going to want to try to recreate that in their home. They will not be 25 when they do it.
Yeah.
They might be, but they probably won't be. They might get a pair of stereo speakers when they're 25, but they're not going to be building a home theater in their basement when they do so. So I think that and the whole women don't want to see speakers. I know plenty of dudes that don't want to see speakers, and we've heard that on this podcast multiple times. And I'll be honest with you, half of you guys are blaming your wives. Okay, you're blaming your wives. You don't want to see the speakers. Just own it, man. That's fine. I'm not going to judge you. I don't care. You don't want to see the speakers. That's fine. You want to have a nice, clean look. That's great. I'm not going to go like, well, if he had a pair, he'd put the speakers in the room, but he doesn't, so he wants them in the wall. You don't gotta blame your wife for that. So, and yes, there are plenty of people, male and female, that don't want to see speakers because they don't understand. And that's an education thing, and that's them just being exposed to a fraction of what you were exposed to when you were, testing out speakers. That's not being included in the conversation. They're only asked, "You want, I want to put this big, massive speaker in my room." They're like, "I don't want that in the room." Well, let's, maybe not start that conversation there. Let's start it a little bit earlier with like, "Hey, we want to get we want to have a better movie. Let's go find something together. Let's go listen together and see what we like," because that's how you get the buy-in. You don't get the buy-in by showing them a picture of an SVS sub and realizing it's twice the size of my child and thinking, "Oh no, we can't put that in there." So there's a lot of stuff going on with this thing. With this, it's an opinion piece.
Yeah. No,
and he's more than welcome to it. I have the same sorts of reactions when we used to walk past the Macintosh. This is way back in the day when they used to have those huge line array speakers, and even on the show floor of Cedia with no room around it, you in 30 feet away, you're like, "Dang, that's bright." And they were like, "Oh, well, that's because only old guys buy it, and they can't hear anyway, so that they need it bright so they can at least hear a little bit of it." I'm like, really? You think that's what it is? Or you think maybe you're just ageist?
No, I think the number of people caring about and loving audio is as healthy as it ever was. I'm not worried about that. I think part of what happened is the crowd that if you just say the audiophile and you picture the person who goes to the 2-channel only conventions and shows, they're someone who they came of age. They got their first jobs and they started getting into being able to purchase their own stuff in the late 60s and 70s, when the only speakers that were available were gigantic boxes, and all the advertising. Well, it's the picture of the guy being blown away, sitting back in his chair and being blown away by these massive speakers. And that's the idea. That's the visual that got burned into their mind at that age, right when they were deciding what they were going, and they've carried that through their whole life, and that's what they've been chasing ever since, is that notion, that idea, and that image in their mind. Whereas I think people getting into audio today who are younger, it is about convenience, it is about being discreet. Now the smaller and more wireless you can make your earphones, the more attractive they are. The idea, the notion of what it means to love and care about your audio, the marketing has changed. The image that a person has in mind has changed, but it doesn't mean they care about or enjoy audio any less. So that's why I think it's a difference of perception and perspective, that this is someone who's older and grown up with that image of the giant speakers blowing you away in your seat. And I think now people are going after I've got my portable device that I keep all my music with me, and if I want to listen to it and no one else even knows about it, so much the better.
Right. All right, Amelia. Amelia used to enjoy going to the movies quite often, but obviously that isn't the case right now, so she started thinking about what she could do at home. Her father passed away a few years ago. Our condolences. And she inherited his speaker setup. It's a pair of self-powered bag-end PM6 professional studio monitors with coaxial drivers and 2 bag-end Infrasub 12 Pro 12-inch subwoofers. I haven't heard the name bag-end in forever. Oh my God. I actually listened to some of these one time. A long time ago. I can't remember if it was a CD or a CES. They're very interesting speakers. They're very interesting, and their subs are like ridiculous, right? I'm clicking on it right now because I haven't.
Yeah, no, they go really, really low, not necessarily super loud, because these are targeted at a studio setting. They are targeted at a near-field application. However, they have sufficient power and sensitivity that, in a not massive theater, this isn't something you'd put into a gigantic theater, but if you're sitting in that reasonable 10 to 12 foot range, they're totally sufficient for that. So no real worries on that front, and that sort of studio monitor sound.
So she bought an AV receiver, a Denon X3600H, and she followed the manual for the bag-end subwoofers and speakers as closely as she could. A salesperson at Crutchfield was very helpful, but some of the terminology in the manuals and some of the things the Crutchfield salesperson tried to explain to her kind of lost her. Hey, if you think that has anything to do with anything, believe me, I have never been as frustrated as I have been trying to read a receiver manual.
Right.
And Denon receiver manuals over the last 10 years have significantly improved.
Oh, yes.
Significantly.
But this isn't a completely typical consumer speaker and subwoofer connection.
Right.
So on top of it being a new thing, creating your own surround sound system at home, you've got speakers and a subwoofer that are atypical for a home user. So, yeah.
So I don't know how dedicated you are to keeping these speakers because they were your father's speakers. But the fact that they are going to be a little bit different to connect, we can talk you through it.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal. We'll make this happen. You can also, sell them and get something different that might be a little bit easier. That would be fine too. But we're gonna proceed on the notion that you want to keep these for now. And I would recommend that. I would recommend keeping them for now, getting used to their sound, and then deciding, once you can go outside again, going to some showrooms to go listen to some other speakers to see if there is in fact something out there that you might like better. So she's been looking for additional home theater device and came across our podcast. She would like to have a full surround setup, 5 speakers, and the 2 bag-end subwoofers. As mentioned, she already has a Denon X3600H receiver, which is a great receiver. And following the manual and Crutchfield's advice, here's the situation now. So I did not click on this just subs. Do they have normal connections at the back, or are they weird?
Actually, on the back of the subs is significantly different because...
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
It's all XLR.
It's all XLR, and the way Bag End envisioned things was that you would be sending 5 full range signals from a preprocessor, all XLR, and all of this stuff, all of the Bag End stuff that she has, it is only at the professional line level. So it's at the +4 dBu level, which is 12 decibels louder. It's expecting a signal that is 12 decibels stronger than the consumer line level, which is at -10 dBV. There is that going on there, and that was, she mentioned some of the stuff that the Crutchfield person was talking about, these differences in voltages kind of through her, but we can go through the situation as it is right now, and it'll help explain things.
Okay. All right. So she has 2 RCA to XLR cables. Those go from the front left and right outputs of the Denon to the A-B line inputs on the back of the first sub. That subwoofer has a high-pass XLR outputs and a line out to slave sub. So she has 3 XLR to XLR cables, A and B to the PM6 studio monitors, and a third XLR cable to the second subwoofer. Both subwoofers and both PM6 speakers are plugged into wall outlets, so 4 power cables in all, plus the Denon power cable, of course. There are some little boxes with lights on them that plug into the first subwoofer's dynamic filter indicator port that says, not an input. She figures they are for someone working in a studio to let them know if anything is reaching its limits. They don't seem to be necessary, but she tried plugging them in and all the lights were green. Okay. So both subs and both speakers are making sounds, and it actually sounds amazing, but she has this fancy Denon receiver and everything is basically disabled. And she's just using the left and right outputs, nothing else, and no other settings. So she asked the Crutchfield guy about using the subwoofer output, and he said that with this professional gear like this, they sometimes have their own filters, and you don't want to stack filters, so it's probably better to just connect things the way they say in their manuals. The other concerns she has are the adapter cables that go from RCA to XLR. They seem like giant cables and adapters, but everything seems to be working okay. The Crutchfield guy said there might be an issue with different voltages or something. So can we let her know what we think about everything she has right now? Are things all connected correctly? Should she be using the subwoofer outputs? And are these RCA to giant XLR cables all okay? So first of all, let's just go through generally, kind of like before we get into the specifics. So the outputs of your receiver, so normally what you would do is the amplifier within your receiver, you would run this ADB speaker wire from the little terminals on the back of the receiver, which you're not using at all right here.
Correct.
Right, the terminal back of your receiver to the terminals on your speaker, right? And then that would... The amplifier would provide the power that the speaker demanded. The speaker would say, I need this much power to make the sound that you're telling me to make. And it would say, okay, here's the power. And then it would do it, right? Well, the amplifiers for these speakers are in the speakers.
Yes.
That's why instead of having itty-bitty wires, you got to have big old wires. Why is that? Because that's the way those wires are made. That's to prevent interference from coming from outside to getting into the wire, which can happen. It cannot happen very easily with speaker wire. So the speaker wire doesn't need the shielding, doesn't need all the protection around it, which is what makes these things so big. And plus your XLR cables have 3 connectors instead of 1 in them, and there's a bunch of other stuff. So that means that you're not using the amplifiers within your receiver.
Correct.
Okay, you're not using the amplifiers within your receiver, which is fine. You're using the amplifiers which are in your 2 speakers and your 2 subwoofers, and that's why. But normally at this point you would say, okay, Tom, I get it. So, but how come I'm plugging into the sub? This is where things get even more confusing because if you were to buy home theater gear with speakers that had amplifiers in the speakers, you would plug the left and right for the speakers, for the front left and right speakers, into the speakers themselves, and they'd let the amplifiers into the speakers make the sound, and then you would take the subwoofer output and plug it into one of the subs or split it and have it go to both the subs, and the subs would play their own sounds. Okay, but we can't do that not because of any other thing other than the fact that your speakers are not built to interact in that way.
Well,
they're built to interact.
You can do it. It's just not the way that it's described in the bag end
in the manual.
So I'll get into that in a little bit.
So the manual says, and because of the way that you would do this in the studio, you plug everything into the sub. The sub provides a crossover, and what the crossover does is it takes some sounds and saves it for the subwoofer, and takes the rest of the sounds and sends it out to the speakers. Okay, that's what a crossover does in this case. Okay, but your receiver has a crossover as well. Your receiver can do this. So I know where Rob's going with this. Mm-hmm. Without. So I just want to understand. I want you to understand why you were instructed to do it the way you're doing it, and I want to say congratulations, because there are more than a large percentage of people out there would not have got sound at all. I cannot tell you how many times on this podcast we've got people like, I can't make sound. I'm like, I know, it's fine, we'll get you there. So you've got sound, mm-hmm. and it sounds good. That's good. So you've got everything hooked up the way Bag End wants you to hook it up.
Right. Yeah. So I will say,
and that's great.
If you were to leave all of your connections the way that they are right now, including the idea that you want to add a center and surrounds to this, but if you were to leave everything as it is right now, it will function. It will function perfectly fine. You will hear all the sounds that are present in your recordings with everything connected exactly as you have it right now. What you will do, and I mean, she's already described this, but in your Denon, in your speaker configuration, you will be telling it that you do not have a subwoofer. Even though you physically have two subwoofers, it isn't getting a signal from the subwoofer output. So you tell your Denon, I don't have a subwoofer, I just have two large front speakers, which is exactly the way you already have it set up. And now all of the bass gets sent to those front, left, and right outputs. And that bass gets channeled through your subwoofer that's connected to your Denon right now. It keeps all the bass for itself. It passes along the higher frequencies to your front, left, and right self-powered speakers, and then it duplicates the bass out to your second subwoofer via that slave output. Right. So both of the subwoofers are playing the exact same bass, which is exactly the way we want it. Bag End designed that well. And your speakers, your front, left, and right speakers, are only playing higher frequencies. They're not playing all the low bass, and that is also good. Now, the one drawback of having things connected this way is that you do not have the option of making just the subwoofers louder or quieter. If you wanted to make just the bass louder or quieter, you could only do that by adjusting the front, left, and right signals. You don't have a subwoofer signal that you can adjust independent of your other speakers. And so it's really only a question of if you even want to do that. Because the reason Bag End made it this way, where you plug the speaker channels into the subwoofer and then the subwoofer feeds the speakers, is because it was designed for systems that don't have their own bass management. It was designed for systems that just have...
And bass management is that crossover I was talking about. It's what he's talking about. Being able to split the bass off. Mm-hmm. We call that bass management. We split the bass off and we send it to the subwoofers. Yeah. In this case, the bass management is happening inside the subwoofer instead of inside the receiver.
This was designed for a pro system where it was just sending 5 full range signals from 5 speaker channels and a dedicated low frequency effects channel, that 0.1 in the signal, where that was all being sent out of the preamplifier. So Bag End envisioned all of that just gets plugged into the subwoofer. The subwoofer takes care of keeping all the bass for itself and only sending higher frequencies out to the speakers. But when you have something like your Denon, the Denon can manage what keeps the bass and what plays only the higher frequencies before the signal gets sent out. Right. So you have the option. And this is, like I say, it's only if you want the option to independently turn up or down the subwoofer without affecting the volume level of the rest of your speakers. And of course, many people do want that option because at night they want to be able to turn down just the subwoofer, not all of their speakers. Or maybe they really want to kick some, bass heavy music and they want to be able to turn up just the subwoofer, but not all of the speakers. If you want to be able to do that, it's not too complicated. You would need to purchase 2 more of the same RCA to XLR cables that you already purchased. Right now you have 2 RCA to XLR cables and 3 XLR to XLR cables. If you want to let the Denon handle all of the bass managing, you wouldn't need you'd need 1 of the XLR to XLR cables. You would still connect the 2 subwoofers together with that slave output. That's still a good thing. But you would get 2 more of the RCA to XLR cables. And now the left and right outputs of the Denon, instead of going to the sub, they would go directly to your PM6 monitors, your front, left, and right speakers. And now you would turn on the subwoofer in the Denon. You would say, I have 1 subwoofer. Even though you physically have 2, you would tell it I only have 1. And that would get connected from the subwoofer output on the Denon to the first bag end subwoofer, which would then...
The RCA to XLR.
Yeah, RCA to XLR. So that would be the only change. And then you could actually just go through the setup wizard that Denon has built into the X3600. The connections that they describe will, of course, be using speaker wire first or connecting RCA cables to an external amplifier. So it won't look exactly like your setup, but we've described how to connect your front, left, and right speakers and your subwoofer. You've already done that. You run through the wizard, and it will get the rest of everything all set up for you, including managing all the bass for you really nicely.
Is there volume control on these?
There is not. There is not.
Okay.
So,
okay. Well, that's actually convenient.
It is.
Honestly.
It is. So the thing.
That's one less step you have to worry about. And I want to make it clear here. We are going through this slowly because this is an extremely confusing
and it's unusual. It's atypical.
An unusual thing. Yes.
Yeah. So the thing that the Crutchfield guy told you about these differences in voltages that came up, that was what I was mentioning, where professional equipment is expecting a stronger signal than consumer equipment. Now, all that means is that you might see, once you go through the setup wizard in your Denon, that there's a thing called your speaker levels. There's a setting called your speaker levels, and those might be positive numbers. They might be as high as something like +10. And that wouldn't be out of place, simply because your speakers that you have, these PM6s from Bag End, and these subwoofers that you have are expecting a stronger signal than typical consumer subwoofers and speakers. So that's all it is. So if you saw a fairly large positive number in your speaker levels for your front, left, right, and your subwoofer, nothing to worry about. We would anticipate that.
Right. So even with the way it was hooked up before, she should still be able to run Odyssey and all that stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, the advantage, I don't even know if we call it an advantage. The advantage of hooking it up the way that the Rob's describing, instead of going from the subwoofer to the 2 speakers, that you take the subwoofer out, go to the sub, the left and right out, go to the left and right speakers directly, is that when you start adding on more speakers later, it becomes much less complicated.
And that's where we're getting into next.
Yeah, right. And that's the advantage. Plus, it allows you, like Rob said, to adjust the subwoofer output directly from the receiver, and even the left and right speaker. Now, if you do this, what we're saying, and you see that it says +12 on both your front and left and right speakers, that could indicate that the receiver does not have enough voltage to tell the amplifier in the speaker to get as loud as it should be.
But that would have happened already. With the way it's already connected, that would have happened if it were the case. And
do we know that she ran the auto setup?
Oh, I guess not. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
but I mean, everything is sounding okay at defaults, which is with the level set at 0.
So we're hoping that you're going to see something. So plus, the reason I'm saying plus 12 is the issue is because plus 12 is as high as it goes.
That's as high as it goes.
It doesn't go past plus 12. So if you're at plus 12, you could have just hit plus 12, or it could actually need plus 15, plus 20. And then that's if your speakers are way far back and all this other stuff. So if you hit plus 12, then we might be dealing with some issues. I don't think that's
going to happen. I don't think she's dealing with an enormous room where she's sitting really far away from it. Nothing about what she said sounds like that.
So regardless of how you set it up or how you end up setting it up, you're going to want to run the auto setup, the program, go through the default and everything, and just ignore what it tells you about how to connect your speakers.
Yeah.
Because your speakers are already making sound, don't worry about
your
that.
Your front, left, right, and your subwoofers, it won't look like what the wizard says, but
right.
You know better.
If it says that it's playing sound out of the left speaker and it's coming out of the right speaker, well then there's an issue. But other than that, you should be okay. And the advantage of what Rob's saying to plug directly in the left and right to the receiver to the speakers allows you to add more speakers more easily than the other way around, which would require 2 more cables instead of just 1 more.
And
cable.
The worry that the Crutchfield guy told you about, quote unquote, stacking filters, that is a real thing. We use the word cascading on AVRant, cascading filters, where you have a filter on top of another filter, maybe another filter on top of that. In this particular setup with these bag end components, it is not a concern because the only filter being applied by the bag end equipment itself is if you're using those high pass outputs of the subwoofer, which you are right now. What those are doing is taking the bass away from the speakers and keeping it in the subwoofer. Like I say, the Denon is going to do that itself. It's going to perform the exact same thing, and there's no additional filter being applied to it. The left and right signals never even get to the subwoofer if you plug the left and right speakers directly into the Denon instead of through the subwoofers. So in this case, we don't have a worry about stacking or cascading filters.
Okay. So she wants to add a center and surround speakers. So what should she do? Does she have to get 3 more of the bag end studio monitors? She wouldn't mind 3 of the PM6 bag end speakers up front. They look compact in pictures, but in person she finds them huge and heavy, so she isn't keen to use 2 more of them as surrounds. She has looked at the 5.1 diagrams for where speakers should go, and she can get very close to that if the surround speakers aren't so big. They'd be to the sides of her couch and wouldn't have to be right by her head if they're smaller. So what can we suggest? And what's going to happen with all the XLR cable stuff if she still has the bag end subs, the 2 PM6 front left and right speakers, but a different center and different surrounds? You're not going to like my suggestion, but we're going to go with it anyways. So there are... That voltage thing we were talking about before, if you move these 2 bag ends as surrounds, they'll be so close to you that certainly will never be an issue. And I know that they're too big to be surrounds, and I understand that. I'm really tempted to tell you to sell those things and just get 5 new speakers to go all the way around you.
That is certainly.
If you don't want to, but I'm not telling you to sell the subs.
No, the subs are fine.
I think you should keep the subs.
Yeah, they're fine.
So if there's some sentimental value going on here, you're like, well, keep the subs because I guarantee your dad loved the subs the best. That's the truth. But if you can, so I like putting them as surrounds, even though you say that they're not really going to work there. But I like putting them as surrounds because that eliminates any possible issue you have with voltage, making sure that they won't ever have to play very loud at all because they'll be really close to you, and because you're not going to have to find a center channel that what we call timbre match. A timbre match just means it sounds the same as. We're looking for something that sounds the same as the bag ends. Now the bag ends are a studio monitor. They should be a relatively flat speaker with no noticeable dips or humps in the frequency response range. Some speakers try to have a quote-unquote sound, okay? And that sound is it colors everything that comes through it. If you think of a headphone or a speaker that you've had and you're like, oh, this sounds pretty good, and you put another one, you're like, oh, this one sounds different, and you're playing the same song, that's the timbre mismatch. You want to have, if you're going to have 3 speakers together at the front of your room, those 3 speakers should all sound the same. Bag ends should sound pretty flat and neutral, which means if you get a pretty flat and neutral, meaning that when it asks for a volume, like if you played like a every single individual frequency from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, it should all come out the same volume, all at the same time if you're asking for it to be the same volume as it goes up. Flat means that it's all the same volume. Not flat, or would mean that some frequencies would be louder and some would be softer. So flat up, if you get a flat center channel, you should be okay. There's lots of them out there that we could recommend. RBH would certainly be a very good choice for something like that. Aperion, Ascend Acoustics, they all make, these are all online, well, not RBH, but these are all online options that you can look into. SVS would not be a bad choice there either for that center channel, and they all offer small surrounds that you could use as your surrounds if you want to do that. But just realize that if you get that center channel that's not matched directly to your bag ends, you might find that there's a timbre mismatch, and then you'll find yourself having to decide, do I keep the bag ends or do I get the speakers that match the center channel? So that's something to consider.
There is the option of, so I would not suggest getting 3 more of the PM6s. I don't see any particular reason to do that. Because of just the size, I completely understand not wanting to use them as surrounds, so I am okay with you keeping them as front, left, rights. Now, the PM6, one of them by itself is about $1,000. That's the going price. I don't know if you want to pay that much to get, one more PM6 to use as your center. It would be identical to your front, left, rights. There is the option, though, of getting Bag End's own M6. It's the exact same speaker, but without the amplification built into it. It's what you would call a passive speaker, where it is taking the power from your Denon receiver, exactly like the Denon receiver is expected to do. So that is a $660 speaker, which is still not cheap, but it's less than $1,000, and you would actually get to use the Denon's amplification for the center, and everything about the design is identical otherwise. So I think that's a very reasonable thing. If you have 3 of them across the front, you just pay a little bit less, get the M6 from Bag End as your center. Then for the surrounds, some speakers that I think would actually match quite nicely with the Bag Ends would be Elax Debut 2.0, and they have a model called the OW4, which is meant to be hung on a wall, just has a keyhole mount on the back, and it's only about 6 inches deep front to back. And pretty reasonable price, $290 for a pair of those, so much less expensive than your Bag End speakers, but I think that would all work quite nicely. ELAC does have a higher-end series called Unify, where if you wanted a center speaker that isn't quite as big as your M6 or PM6, that they might match fairly nicely because they also have the tweeter inside the woofer exactly like your Bag End speakers do. So ELAC's Unify, there's center speakers in that range from $380 up to $580, depending on the exact model that you get. And I think if you match some ELACs with some Bag End speakers, that it would work out quite nicely.
There you go. And all of those would connect with just straight speaker wire. Yeah. So that reduces the cost of the wire that you'll be buying, that's for sure, along with other things. So let us know what you go with. Again, I suggested a couple of speaker manufacturers out there. We could talk more about that if you want to get into it. Mark has a similar question as one of Chad's from last week. Mark is using a Sen Sierra 2 EX bookshelf speakers with their raw ribbon tweeters. He and his wife sit together on a love seat about 9 feet back from the speakers. If either of them is listening alone, they sit dead center between the speakers, and the imaging is excellent. But when they're sitting together, neither of them is dead center, and the experience just isn't the same. Furthermore, if one of them sits dead center and the other person is further off axis, not only is the imaging different, but there's a noticeable difference in the volume as well, with the off-axis position being quieter. He followed Dolby speaker placement guidelines, but there's actually quite a bit of leeway and no particular rules about toe-in. So how do we widen the sweet spot? And is this particular to the raw ribbon tweeters, or would it be like this no matter what speaker they're using? 9 feet back from the speakers. Okay, so 9 feet's not particularly far, but it's not super close either. So this is definitely a toe-in issue. I mean, what we often talk about in this podcast is face them straight out. Yep. And listen at that
90-degree perpendicular.
And then turn them directly towards you and listen
Which
to
is,
them
I
like that.
I think what it's like right now. It seems like he's got them aimed
it does feel
right
that
at
way,
that middle
right.
sweet spot. Yeah.
I would, and then you kind of can play between the two of them, right? Play between the two of them. Sometimes you can, like we talked about last week, you fire them across each other, like tow them in so much that they're firing across each other.
Imagine
like the cross point would be
laser coming out of
them.
the tweeters. The two lasers would actually cross in front of your listening position.
In this case, I would guess that you should be much more directly forward with your speakers, with maybe 10 to 15 degree toe in would be my guess.
If that.
But you really don't. If they're pointed at you, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem.
This is a little bit particular to the RAL ribbons. As I mentioned last week, if you are bang on axis to them, they do have a slightly different sound to when you are even just a slight bit off axis. It is noticeable, and I'm betting when you were setting these up critically for that one center position, you were like, hey, when I have them pointed straight at me, that is when I get the most high-frequency detail, when the volume is at its peak. That is the case. You're not crazy that you found that location and probably have them towed in so they're aimed right at that center center position, seating position. But the result is anybody off axis gets a slightly different sound, and it actually is noticeable. Not all speakers are like that. A lot of speakers that have a bit of a high-end roll-off, they're quite forgiving in the toe end. You can tow them in just about anywhere, and because they have a high-frequency roll-off, you don't really notice it if you're a bit off axis. But with the RAL ribbons that are very flat beyond 20 kilohertz, you do get that effect. So, same solution as last week with speakers like this. If everybody is slightly off axis, if nobody is bang on axis, then it sounds more uniform for all the seats. So yeah, either pointed basically straight ahead, or there's no harm in experimenting. Tow them in so much that if there were lasers coming out of the tweeters, they would actually cross in front of you. But everybody's off axis that way.
Yeah, regardless, you should be off axis. It's unless you're using an electrostatic speaker, and I know ribbon tweeters are similar, but you almost never want to be directly have the speakers pointed directly at your head. I mean, if they're not headphones, they shouldn't be pointed at your head. Mark is using Plex. Same guy. Mark is using Plex, and he likes to be able to easily roll previews and demo clips. He found a handful of Dolby Atmos clips on Dolby's own website, but is there some place you could download some more? I don't know.
There is. It's called thedigitaltheater.com. So The Digital Theater, all one word. There they have pretty much all the Dolby trailers. They also have them in like lossless True HD plus Atmos and the Dolby Digital Plus version plus Atmos. So if you want to compare lossy to lossless, they've even got those for download. But that's a good place to get pretty much all the Dolby Atmos trailers. Thedigitaltheater.com.
Gurinder is using Polk LSI M705 towers and M706C center. For surrounds, he has the original wedge-shaped LSI FX speakers. They stick out about 10 inches when mounted on the side walls. Now that he has new, larger seating, he'd like something for surrounds that doesn't stick out so much. The current Polk LSI lineup includes the M702 FX wedge-shaped surrounds. Did I say that wrong? No, I didn't. But they would still stick out about 7 inches. He'd like as close to flat as possible without going to in walls. Any suggestions? Stay away from the wedge ones.
Well, he's trying to.
Yeah, he certainly is.
The issue with the Polk LSIs is they have a pretty unique sound. That ring radiator tweeter that they use and Polk's tuning on the LSI series doesn't sound like a lot of other speakers. So if you want a really good timbre match, you kind of got to stick within the LSI lineup. My suggestion to you is to get in walls. They had one called the 65 LS, which was just a 6.5-inch woofer and the ring radiator tweeter, but those seem to be discontinued and not available anymore. So there's the 265 LS, which is just an in-wall with two 6.5-inch drivers, and the ring radiator tweeter. Not a crazy price. They have them at Crutchfield for $280 a piece, which is not an insane price, especially with ring radiator tweeters that used to be way more expensive. But it is an in-wall speaker, so of course it has the typical 3-inch depth to it and protrudes a little bit. I would suggest, since we know Gurinder's fairly handy and he's done a lot of changes in his system, maybe you just make yourself some faux columns. 3.5-inch deep faux columns, I mean literally 2x4s on the outsides of your existing walls. That gives you a place to install these 3.5-inch deep technically in-wall speakers, but you just have faux columns to put them in. That's about as thin as anything can get. And that's what I would suggest, because LSIs are not easy to match with any other speakers.
All right. This is still Gurinder. Gurinder says, Tom was right. Tell my wife, please.
Podcast
Please.
over. It stops there.
I'm done. Tom's going out on top. It's like George. So just changing his seating and is leading to a domino effect. We talked about his surround speakers. He also mentioned previously how his new seating for the front row means he needs a riser for his back row. That is also going to impact his surround back speakers and potentially the acoustic panels on his back wall. Regarding the seating riser, there is no way he's going to fill one with sand. Also, he already has an SVS PB13 Ultra situated at the back of his room. But if he has a seating riser that goes wall to wall, he'll have to put the PB13 Ultra on top of the riser. It's like an earthquake. And that change in height would mean he has to modify his corner bass trap as well. So what do we think about making the riser only as wide as the back row couch? I think that's fine. I mean, you could do what Ted did and use those. What did he
Bed
do
risers
for that couch?
It was bed risers. The things you can put under a low bed to turn it into a higher height bed.
Yeah, you're gonna need to build steps up to your chairs, but yeah. I mean, I don't think there's anything really wrong with that, as long as there's an area in front that you can walk up and easily put your feet on the ground. You don't want people dangling.
Yeah,
if
the
ceiling,
riser is long enough front to back that you basically like approach it from the side of the riser, step up in front of your seats and get into your seat that way. I think that's fine. That's exactly what HT Market actually sells. They have aftermarket platforms that you can buy. Now, they're not cheap. It's like, what is it, $450 for each piece or something like that, and each piece is only 2 feet wide because it's made out of real cherry wood, and that the shipping cost and everything is insane on there. But the reason I'm mentioning them is have a look at them, have a look at the design of them, because that's the type of thing that you could construct yourself. And it's the sort of design you're talking about where it only has to be about the same width as the seats that are on top of it. So, these are, they made them 7 feet front to back and 2 feet wide. You could, change the dimensions if you're making them yourself. But yeah, you can have a look at what they've got over there at HT Market to see the aftermarket platforms that they're selling and do something similar yourself.
And I'm going to recommend that, even though you say you're not going to fill up with sand, I would not close everything off completely until you have experienced the vibrations yourself. Because we'll see. So he asked about covering the ceiling and side walls at the front and the back of his room with black velvet. He will probably go with the baritone black velvet from Seymour AV that we mentioned, but the price adds up quick. You ain't lying, dude. So how far forward from the screen should the black velvet go? Well, how nutty are you about this thing? Because I think it shouldn't. Yeah, I mean, technically it should go so that you literally can't see anything else.
Yeah, the ideal would be that the velvet would come to the halfway point between your distance from the screen to you. So whatever that is, divide that by 2, and that's how far along the sidewall and ceiling ideally it would come, because that would mean that the projector at the back of the room fires forward, hits the screen, and the light that reflects off the screen at angles, it will never make a bounce off of the wall or ceiling to your eye. It will always hit velvet if the velvet comes halfway between the screen and you. So that's the ideal. If you're more worried about just the shadow box effect, where you don't get the immediate reflections that scattered from the white screen, hit the sidewalls and the ceiling, and made their way back onto the screen, then the typical recommendation is 4 feet. That'll get rid of the most effect of reflections that came from the wall and ceiling and back onto the screen. But if you want to have the ideal, it would be half the distance between you and the screen.
Yeah. So like $30,000 worth of material, because that includes the ceiling as well and the floor. Like the whole thing, all of it. It's crazy.
Velvet.
Adam. First up, Adam had asked previously about being able to localize his PC2000 sub that is lying down on its side behind its couch. We said to make sure it is decoupled from the floor by using the shipping material foam ribs. and also not physically touching the back of his couch or any walls. He was actually already using foam ribs, and the sub wasn't touching his couch, but it was very close to his side wall originally. He moved it so that it's basically centered behind his couch now, and he can no longer localize it. Better yet, the bass seems to be a whole lot better across all the seats now. So he says, thank you very much. It's amazing what a difference just a change in position he made. Adam has both the older NVidia Shield and the newest 2019 Shield Pro. He's in Australia, and neither one is able to stream Disney Plus content in 4K or with Atmos. 4K and Atmos both work for Netflix. Do 4K and Atmos work for Disney Plus on the NVIDIA Shield? Is it just the Australian version that isn't working? Perhaps they're still limiting bandwidth because of the pandemic? That might be true, but no, it's not that. There's some glitch I know there's some glitch in the 2019 versions that like Atmos isn't working at all on any of the NVIDIA Shields. But that was just as of last week when I was reading it.
Well, I mean, I'm in Canada. I have a 2019 NVIDIA Shield Pro. And as far as the Canadian version of Disney Plus goes, I checked it out today just before the podcast. And not only 4K, but in fact, full Dolby Vision and Atmos were both working for me.
That's good. Because I just researched that the other day, and people were saying that it was glitched.
There was just a Android update. Yesterday.
That could be it.
So
yeah, that could be it.
It's very possible. So as of today, so what is it, November the 17th, as we're recording this, and like I say, in Canada anyway, my 2019 NVIDIA Shield Pro streaming the Canadian version of Disney Plus did 4K, Dolby Vision, and Atmos. So certainly the hardware can do it. Disney Plus can certainly deliver it. It is not a case where the NVIDIA Shield is just not capable of doing it. So if it is still the case in Australia, then it is the Australian version of Disney Plus where something is being limited at this point.
Right. Adam is using a Denon X3600H receiver. It should be able to upmix to Atmos, right? Can we explain how and when upmixing to Atmos should work? It doesn't always seem to be available to him. Well, it should always be available if you're watching a Dolby signal. And the DTS.
I want to be a little bit pedantic in that there is technically no such thing as upmixing to Atmos. What there is the Dolby Surround Upmixer. And the Dolby Surround Upmixer will, if you're listening to a stereo signal, a 5.1 signal, or a 7.1 signal, anything other than actual Atmos, it will upmix it so that sounds come out of your overhead speakers. But to be technically correct, that is not Atmos sound, that is Dolby Surround Upmixer sound. Now, the 3600H was one of those models where there was no cross-pollination of upmixing. So the Dolby Surround Upmixer could only be applied to Dolby signals, so Dolby Digital Plus, or Dolby True HD. And if you were listening to anything that was a DTS signal, that would have to use the DTS Neural X Upmixer.
Which it should default to, right?
Yes, yeah. If you're using the auto mode, it will default to applying the upmixer that works. But for example, if he was watching regular Blu-rays, most of which are DTS HD master audio, and he was like, how come I can't apply the Dolby Surround Upmixer to this? Well, on the X3600H, there was no cross-pollination. But the DTS Neural X Upmixer should have been available to you.
I wonder if the problem here is that he's expecting it to say Dolby Atmos on the front of the thing.
That's why I wanted to be pedantic about it too, because it won't say Atmos.
So what you really want to do, especially with like Denon receivers, they always show you the number of channels that are being like on the right side of the display.
The info button too, it'll show up right on the display.
Yeah, it shows you how many channels are actually being used in your theater. And that's what you want to look at, no matter what it says on the front of the thing. It'll say, Surround or Neural X or whatever. Look at the number of channels, and if it's got like all these channels lit up, well, then you're getting the overhead stuff. I mean, or you could do what I do, which is walk around like a crazy person and put your ear next to every single speaker in your thing and make sure it's playing something.
And not only that, there is supposed to be a firmware update coming before the end of the year that will add the ability to cross-pollinate the upmixers. That is supposed to be coming to those 2019 models. But yes, if you were expecting the front panel to actually say Atmos with anything other than an actual Atmos signal, that will not be the case. It might say something like Dolby Digital Plus Dolby Sur, because it usually shortens Dolby Surround Upmixer.
That's as far as it doesn't have that many characters on those things. All right, Monty. Monty asks, Oculus Quest 2 versus PlayStation VR. For a young teenager, What do we think is the better option? He's not really excited about Oculus requiring a Facebook account. He's heard about some people getting locked out of their accounts when trying to get around Facebook rules. Do we have any advice on that front? Yeah, I mean, there you go right there, right? So you give them the Facebook account, they get the thing, and then they get locked out. So it's a win-win for you. I mean, I'm sure Rob's got some suggestions here because he's had VR. Do you have the Oculus as well, or just
so
the VR?
I have the first generation Oculus Quest. I don't have the Oculus Quest 2, but they're not dramatically different from each other. And I do have PlayStation VR.
I mean, I've always had sort of a hard time swallowing some of the stuff that's been set up or been revealed about the owner or creator of Oculus.
Oh, right.
So,
well, he's not really involved anymore, but
I know,
Facebook, which is
but
just
I have
as
the
bad,
same problem with the I know. I've got the same problem with what's his name? The guy who did Minecraft. It's like, he sold Minecraft, and then he started tweeting, and it's like, ooh, you shouldn't have done that.
So on an experiential level, in terms of putting the thing on, playing games on it, the Oculus Quest devices are in a different league than PlayStation VR. PlayStation VR, there is definite screen door effect because the resolution is just not that high inside of that headset. You have to have a camera that's in front of you. If anything obscures the camera view, if you turn around, it has trouble tracking you, whereas none of that exists with the Oculus Quest. You're using the stupid PlayStation Move controllers as your hands.
The little balls.
The little ping pong balls on sticks. They are not great. So the Oculus Quest is vastly superior. Plus, it's not plugged into anything. There's no wires. You put the headset on, you hold the controller. In fact, with Oculus Quest, you don't even have to hold the controllers now because they're doing hand tracking. So, like, it's way better. And it's actually cheaper at this point. So, from an experiential point of view, I would definitely say Oculus Quest 2. I would say pony up the extra $50 for the, what do they call it? Elite head strap? Whatever it is,
right?
The add-on head strap,
it
makes a world of difference with the Quest 2. So it's worth ponying up the extra $50 for that. As far as the Facebook thing goes, there is still a separation between Facebook and Oculus. You must have a Facebook account to create your Oculus account, but after that, you can keep them quite separate. You don't have to share any of your Oculus information on your Facebook account, or vice versa. People who are friends with you on the Facebook account don't have to be able to see anything you're doing inside of Oculus. So as long as you go through the privacy settings, you can keep them pretty separate. He was like, could he use his Monty's Facebook account to log in so he doesn't have to create one for his kid? And it's like, yeah, you can, be, as long as you're okay with your Oculus Quest also being under your name instead of his name. That's what will happen. Where people were getting locked out was, ironically, people who were buying more than one Quest. And putting them both onto their same Facebook account. And Facebook was like, you can't have two Quests on the same account, which is insane because that's some of their biggest fans. So they're working on changing that, but that was largely what was going on there. So there are fairly easy ways. Like if you just want to create a dummy Facebook account, call it John Smith. And
there's a lot of them out there.
There's nothing really they can do about that.
Right. All right, we'll do one more. I know we didn't get very far through these questions.
We spent a lot of time on some of them. Yeah.
We did spend a lot of time. So we'll catch up with the rest of you guys and gals later, okay? But Alan's got a picture here that involves...
It's to remind you, this is the theater that's now going to be 9 feet front to back and about 12.5 feet wide. Originally, he was thinking it would be longer than it is wide, but we convinced him to rotate it 90 degrees, and it's under construction.
All right. So Alan showed his wife the SVS cylinder subs. She liked them. So he'll be selling his PP12 NSD, and he already bought a pair of PC2000s.
There you go.
There you go. So he figures he'll give Rob's 12-step guide a go, and since you don't have to do that.
Not really. Your room is a rectangle.
Your room is a rectangle. Don't do that.
You can go through the first 4 steps of my 12-step guide, which say if your room is an enclosed rectangle, you can stop here. So you can still follow my 12-step guide. You just won't make it through all 12 steps.
So he figures he'll give Rob's 12-step guide a go, at least to the first 4 steps. And since he's trying to finalize his wiring, how should his 2 subs be connected? His X3600H has 2 independent subwoofer outputs, and he plans to have the 2 subs equidistant from his main seat by putting them at midpoints in his side walls. But Rob's guide says to use only one of those subwoofer outputs. Should he plan for a Y splitter, or should he daisy chain the connection? What's the best way to tackle this? Y splitter. coach.
Probably the easiest. I mean, honestly, either approach will work. Why the reason why splitter is mentioned more often is because a lot of subwoofers don't have the option to daisy chain. They don't have a line out to feed a second sub.
You don't want to run the cable all the way over here and then run it all the way back to the other side of the room. I mean, it's just cheaper to buy 2 cables with a Y splitter.
That probably makes the most sense.
Yeah.
So yes, I would agree. You go Y splitter. You have a subwoofer output in the middle of your left wall, middle of your right wall, and you are going to connect them both to a single subwoofer output on your X3600H via a Y splitter.
That's what I did too. So don't worry. You're in good hands. So speaking of running wires, we mentioned the curtain skirt idea. Do we have any examples we can show? He isn't exactly sure how to picture it, and Googling for images wasn't too helpful. Man, I hope you had safe search on that.
Yeah, if you Google search curtain skirt, it probably won't bring up a home theater. I can see how that would be tough to Google.
Okay, so for those of you that aren't on YouTube and can see these pictures here, it is quite literally some fabric that's hung on a little, like, I think it's Velcroed on at the top.
Kind of looks like it. Yeah, this is the example of I forgot to write down his name, so I'm forgetting whose theater this was, but we saw it and loved it. So I mean, imagine an exceedingly short curtain that only comes up maybe, what is that, a foot and a half?
2.5 feet? Yeah, 2 feet at least. Well, it covers the outlets, so it's got to be at least 2.5 feet, I would think. And it's just a piece of fabric. So you can think about this, and it's just bunched, right? Yeah. So he just bunches it and then sticks it to the sticky side of one side of the Velcro, and then puts the Velcro on the wall where he wants it to be, makes it nice and level, and then Velcros it up, and now it hangs directly onto the ground, pleated like that. Mm-hmm. And then whenever he needs to access this wire, he just daintily lifts the skirt, trying not to be too weird about it, and then adjusts the wires as needed, and then puts the skirt back down. Mm-hmm. And that's it.
Now, there is
it's very easy.
Another example, which was building some of your own wainscoting. In this case, doubling as acoustic panels if you want to. So
all the way across the bottom.
If you want to construct, wainscoting that comes halfway up your wall, throw some insulation in there. All your wires are actually outside of your physical drywall walls, but hidden behind your wainscoting, and then you cover that up with fabric and trim, and that can look really excellent too. Yeah,
that's more than I can do. I could do the other.
The skirt,
probably
easier to do.
Yeah, I think I could do the skirt. Yeah. So he bought the monoprice HT35 5.1 speaker package to use the 4 satellites as his Atmos speakers, just as we recommended. They're not too shabby, especially for the price. Mm-hmm. Since his room will now only be 9 feet front to back and about 12.5 feet wide, he'll have a 5.2.4 configuration. Yes! Surround backs can suck it!
Yep. That's how you please Tom. So meanwhile, I want 15 speakers in my tiny theater.
I know. He's looking for 15 speakers. I'm looking for some way to get rid of the holes in my wall where the surround backs are and just throw the things away. And since the ceiling is sloped, it will be lower on the right side and higher on the left side. If he tries to follow Dolby's placement guidelines to angles precisely, his rear heights end up having to go kind of low on the back wall in order to get a 45-degree elevation angle. And if he spaces them apart the same width as his front, left, and right speakers, they aren't that far away from his surrounds. So what do we advise for placing his front height and rear height speakers? Do the exact angles not matter so much since he can aim them? I would just still aim them down, and I would cheat them in a little bit if you're worried about them being too close to his right side surrounds. I would... the angle them, having them directly in line, I'm more worried about them being, just outside of the, at least on the corners of the couch, not any more inside than that. Otherwise, I don't think I would worry too much about, getting them exactly in line with your front, left, and right speakers.
Honestly, if we can convince people not to worry too much at all about precise Atmos speaker angle placement, because really, the effect that you want in Atmos, the effect that is important, is being able to tell left from right and front from back. Because that's really all that's going on. There's some really neat videos from people who have Trinnov altitude processors, because it actually has a function where it can show you a visualization of the objects in an Atmos or a DTSX soundtrack. So it shows you these little glowing globs that move around in a 3D graphic of your room to show what you're doing. And I mean, they're not about super precise positions. This isn't like, there's going to be a bullet shot from the exact angle above me. If it isn't exactly right, it's going to ruin the immersion of the movie. It's not that type of position. It's left versus right, front versus back. So what I would do is go for what visually makes sense in this room, what logistically makes sense. You don't really want a speaker that is going to be like directly above someone's head. You want everybody to be somewhat off axis from your Atmos speakers. Similar type of thing. Everybody should be somewhat off axis. So I would have them a little bit wider than your seats. That might not be as wide as your front left right speakers, given the short depth of the setup that you have, but a little bit wider than your seats. And the same height on your front wall and the same height on your back wall. And I would get them basically as high as you can, right? Since your ceiling is sloped, you're going to have a little bit more space on your left-hand side above the speaker, because I'd have them level, but your ceiling is sloped. But yeah, I would have it basically as close to the ceiling as it can be on the right side, where the sloped ceiling is lower, level across, and have the same height on the front and back wall, and just a little wider than your couches. Don't worry too much what the exact elevation and azimuth angles end up being. You will be able to tell left from right and front to back that way.
Okay. All right, who do we have left?
We have Jason, as well as Dan, since Dan asked a very similar question as Jason's first question. So I lumped them together. We've got Dazz, Brian, and Brian's is a very long question, it turns out. I didn't even remember typing it that long. Infinite Gary and Kurt.
All right. So, again, we have our Infinite podcast coming up on Thanksgiving. Look forward to that, as well as a review of the Tri-Bit speaker headphones on the way. I want to thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank our 125 patrons over at patreon.com, including Alan. So thank you to our patrons.
For sure. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast for anybody who would like to sign up for a voluntary monthly automatic donation. 125 patrons over there, which is awesome. And Alan, thank you so much for being one of them.
All right. I also want to thank Andrew for helping Alan, and Alan for plugging us to Kef, as well as notes of gratitude from Jason, Carrie, Brian, and the same Alan? One of the Allens.
Yeah, so the Alan who was our patron, he's the guy who got in touch with Andrew, and Andrew's helping him out. So Andrew, thank you for doing that. That's awesome to have this community come together. And it's a different Alan who talked us up to Kef. He gave us a note of gratitude, as well as Jason, Carrie, and Brian. We really do appreciate those notes of encouragement. It helps keep us going. And look at us. We're still answering questions for like 2 hours every week. Because, never been a better time to have a home theater than right now.
All right. If you want to get your question answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Mm-hmm. For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.